Hello and welcome to week 3 of Social 100. Today we are going to be talking about roles, networks, and socialization, and really digging into the question, how am I integrated into society? So let's get started. Individuals are made up of roles. Roles are defined by the groups that we're members of. Groups are institutionally bound, and institutions socialize us. If we follow this logic, then nothing is by chance in terms of who we are. So let's unpack what these connections really mean. We'll start with role. A role is a set of behavioral or attitudinal expectations of a person in a particular setting. And these settings are bound by social structure. So, for example, you're a student. That is your role. Because you are a student and you understand that as your role, when you come into a classroom, when we used to go into classrooms, you would sit where the students sit, right? In the desks or at the tables, but not up front at the lectern or at the front desk where you understand the professor to sit. Nobody has probably told you since you were 5 or 6 years old where exactly you're supposed to sit when you come into a classroom. You know that because the institution of education has socialized you into the particular behavior. Think about when you were in high school. Every time the bell rings, you pack up your stuff, you get out, and you head to your next class. Nobody has to tell you to do that. The bell signals you to do that as a reaction to a behavioral expectation that you've learned over time. And education is an institution. So you see how these things work together. By comparison, I'm a professor. That is my role. So when I come into a classroom, again, when we used to come into classrooms, I know that my spot is at the lectern. If I were to come into the room and sit at the desk with the students, everybody would be confused because that behavior is outside of that set of behavioral and attitudinal expectations that come with the role of professor. Now, that's very different than social status. Social status is about your social position in the hierarchy. So if student is your role, year in college is your social status, right? Are you a freshman? Are you a sophomore? Are you a junior? Or are you a senior? Those things denote a position in a hierarchy of students on campus where freshmen are the lowest. That's why they have to register for classes last and have difficulty taking the courses they want. And seniors are the highest. They're about to graduate. They get to register first. We have created an institutional hierarchy around student status. By comparison, I'm a professor. That's my role. My status is associate professor. There's also assistant professor. That's a step down from that. There's full professor. That's a step up from that. There's adjunct professor, visiting professor, lecturer, right? All of those different titles are about social status. They're about where a particular person fits in a hierarchy. All right. Let's talk about groups for a second. Group membership is informed by your network. And when we talk about network, we're talking about the reach of people that you know. And I use the word know very loosely here because it's really just about interaction. You know, this might be somebody that you just met in passing or were introduced to in passing at some point, or that you follow on Twitter or Instagram or you're friends with on Facebook, but you don't even really know in person. It used to be, even just 20 years ago, that most people's social network was bound by their geographic location and the geographic locations of places that they have visited. Now, in 2020, because we have social media, because we have internet and email, we're all much closer, which means that it's much more likely that we have large cosmopolitan networks. And for information reasons, that's actually really good. The more people you know, the more access to information you may have. Let's break down networks. Networks are made up of dyadic and triadic relationships between two entities. I'm using the word entities here because though we are mostly interested in network connections between people, in the social sciences, you could also do network connections between countries, network connections between governments, network connections by import-export partners. There are lots of different ways that you can map these connections that aren't necessarily about people. So when we talk about dyadic or triadic relationships, it's not necessarily people, right? Dyads are two entities. We'll say people just because it's a little bit easier, but just so you know, it's not always people. So if we're talking about a dyadic relationship between two people, maybe a mother and a child, a boyfriend and a girlfriend, or a boyfriend and a boyfriend, or a girlfriend and a girlfriend, up to friends, right? These are dyadic relationships. Triadic relationships include a third person. And in the social sciences, we see triads as a little bit more powerful than dyads because they're not as easily broken. And by that I mean this. If you're dating someone and you guys break up, that dyadic relationship is gone. There's no relationship now. If you are dating someone and that person has a best friend and the three of you spend a lot of time together and then you break up with that person, your partner's or your ex's best friend, they're not broken up. That dyadic relationship still remains. And if that person decides to date someone else, now it's a triad again. So it's not as easily destroyed, quote unquote, as a dyad is. Dyadic and triadic relationships can be asymmetrical or they can be symmetrical. If you're dating someone, that's a symmetrical relationship. It means that the relationship is coming from both ends. Asymmetrical relationships mean that the relationship only goes one way. So you know the President of the United States, we all do, right? But the President of the United States doesn't know us as individuals. If you're stalking someone, that's an asymmetrical relationship, right? Where the relationship is only going one way. I don't know you. I don't know that you're stalking me. And so we can't have a symmetrical relationship. Networks, especially cosmopolitan networks, are really useful because of something called the strength of weak ties, which essentially means that the more people that you know, the more people that are in your cosmopolitan network, the more likely it is that you are to benefit from the expansiveness of that network. Say you're looking for a job, for example, and you post on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn that you are looking for this particular job. Well, the more friends you have on Facebook, the more followers you have on Twitter and Instagram, the more, I don't know what they're called on LinkedIn, friends? I don't know. The more connections that you have on LinkedIn, the more likely it is that somebody will know of a job that fits your qualifications. Whereas if you just have a local network and you're asking your friends and your parents and maybe your significant other, if they know about any jobs, well, the information about available jobs is much smaller dealing with that local network as opposed to the broader cosmopolitan one. There's also something called the small world thesis. Travers and Milgram came up with this theory that suggests that each individual in the world is only separated by 7 people at the most to know that person. Does that make sense? When I was in high school and middle school, we turned this theory into a game called 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. I don't know if you know who Kevin Bacon is. He is an actor from the 80s and 90s. He was in Footloose. But he's been in a lot of movies. And so the game is you pick an actor or actress, and then everybody else has to find the connection between that actor or actress and Kevin Bacon. So this person was in a movie with that person who was in a movie with Kevin Bacon. Because it's 2020 and the internet has everything, you can go and Google 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, click on that first link that comes up, and the computer will do it for you. You can put in Beyonce, you can put in Rihanna, you can put in anything you want, and it will make the connection between that celebrity and Kevin Bacon. It's a really fun way to come to understand the small world thesis a little bit better, and I would suggest maybe just having fun with it for 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, I said earlier that groups are bound to institutions. And it's really the institutions that are socializing us. They're the sort of foundation of that socialization process. For example, fraternities and sororities, right? They're institutionally bound to colleges and universities, but they all also have their own set of behavioral and attitudinal expectations. I pulled up a quick video to help illustrate this in a funny little way. Let's take a look.
Recruitment Vice President.
I'm Haley, Chapter President. I'm Jean Marie, Formal Recruitment Chair. We've been waiting for you all summer, and we're so glad you're finally here.
I hope you enjoyed that. Okay. Socialization teaches us how to behave. It's learned, it's shared, and it's enforced. If you think about the video that I just showed you, those girls in the sorority are all engaging in the same behaviors that they've learned. And they're soliciting new members so that they can teach them these sets of behavioral and attitudinal expectations, share them, right? Let these new girls learn those behavioral expectations, and then you enforce them, right? That's how you get people to continue to engage in the behavior, which essentially means that if you don't behave or have the right thinking or attitude that we expect as a member of this group, there will be punishments. Maybe punishments is too harsh of a word. Oftentimes in social sciences we say sanctions. We will sanction you for not engaging in the behaviors and attitudinal expectations that come with the role of being a member of this group, right? So if you are in a sorority or fraternity, that is a role that you are playing, that is created by the group that you are a member of, that's bound by the institution that is creating the socialization expectations. Now, some groups socialize us more than others. Primary groups are those groups that socialize us the most. Those are the people that we are around the most, our family, our significant others, our very close and bestest friends. Secondary groups also socialize us, but to a less intense extent. This is often if you're a member of a sports team or a fraternity or sorority, that would be a secondary group membership. A religion that means a lot to you in terms of behavioral and attitudinal expectations. Those would be secondary groups. And then there are also reference groups. And reference groups are not necessarily people that we know or that we interact with on a daily basis, but instead are people that we take cues from about how to behave, how to look, how to speak, how to act, what things to wear, what things to like, right? So, for example, for maybe the last 10 years, the Kardashian sisters have been a reference group for standards, American standards of beauty, for example. People want to look like them. They go to plastic surgeons to have their bodies changed and shaped to look like them. That is them being a reference group in a lot of ways. Lastly, there are some institutions which socialize us to a much stronger extent. And we often call this process re-socialization because it's asking us to empty ourselves of all of those existing behavioral and attitudinal expectations and take on a whole new set that are bound by these very specific and rigid institutions, like mental institutions, jail and prisons, and the military. I don't know if you've ever heard the term jarhead. It's used to describe members of the U.S. Marine Corps, and essentially what it means is these people have emptied their heads of all of their sort of regularness as citizens, and in its place, all of the aspects of socialization of being a Marine are put there instead. And really, that concept, that term, jarhead, is taking into consideration this idea of re-socialization in total institutions. Okay, I'm going to leave you, as always, with an active learning exercise, and this one is quick. Just make a list of what roles you play, what groups you belong to, and then try to think about the impact that your network connections have had on who you've become. And we will talk about this in class next week. I'll see you then.